My sister raised her glass and smirked, her voice echoing through the wedding hall. My sister is a single mother, unwanted by anyone. Laughter exploded around me like knives cutting into my skin. Then my mother leaned in, her words dripping with venom. She's nothing but a used product. In that moment, I wanted to vanish, swallowed whole by the marble floor beneath my feet. I had sacrificed everything for them, and this was my reward. Public humiliation. But before the echoes of laughter could fade, a deep voice shattered the room. Enough. I stood frozen in that glittering ballroom, the sting of my sister's words still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. My name is Clara Bennett, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one who carried the weight no one else wanted to bear. My father died when I was barely old enough to drive, and my mother remarried quickly, clinging to a man who never saw me as his own. From that day on, it became my unspoken duty to keep the family afloat. I was the one who watched over Ivy, my little sister, like a second mother. I gave up college so she could attend a private school we could barely afford. I worked 2 jobs, balancing the exhaustion of fluorescent-lit offices by day and late-night waitressing by night, just to pay for her clothes, her books, her endless activities. She was the golden child, delicate and adored, and I was the silent shadow behind her, patching holes so she could shine. While my friends built futures, I built a cage for myself, 1 bar at a time, all in the name of love and loyalty. When I became pregnant, everything shifted again. Ethan was not part of my plan. He was my salvation in disguise. His father vanished before he could even see the color of Ethan's eyes, leaving me with a baby and a broken heart. I thought my family would rally around me, but instead, they turned their backs. My mother's eyes hardened, her voice sharp. You made your bed, now lie in it. Ivy, then a carefree teenager, only smirked, amused that her perfect sister had finally slipped. I raised Ethan on my own, without money, without affection, and certainly without approval. But I did it. I survived. I endured. I put Ethan first, just as I had put Ivy first all those years. I wore my sacrifice like a quiet badge of honor, believing that somewhere deep down, my family would see me, would appreciate me. That was my mistake. Ivy grew into a woman who knew nothing of sacrifice. She was strikingly beautiful, with sharp green eyes and a smile that could open doors I never even knew existed. While I was washing Ethan's school uniforms at midnight, Ivy was posting pictures from rooftop bars, wearing designer clothes I couldn't pronounce. She had learned early that charm was a currency, and she spent it recklessly. Then she met Nathaniel Pierce. He was tall, composed, with that effortless grace only the wealthy seem to carry. His family's name carried weight, old money, connections, influence. I still remember the day Ivy introduced him to us. My mother nearly glowed with pride, her voice syrupy as she praised him. I stood in the corner holding Ethan's hand, watching the way Ivy clung to Nathaniel's arm as if he were a prize she had won. It didn't take long for Ivy's contempt for me to grow bolder. "Clara, you should be grateful," she once told me after dinner, her tone dripping with superiority. "At least one of us is elevating the family name." She said it in front of Nathaniel, as if diminishing me would make her shine brighter. I laughed it off at the time, but something in me cracked. I had never asked for recognition, but the cruelty of being treated like a stain on her polished life gnawed at me. Still, I endured. I always endured. I told myself Ivy was young, immature, that she didn't mean the things she said, but deep down I began to sense something darker, a hunger in her eyes when she looked at me as if my existence was an inconvenience she wished she could erase. The closer the wedding came, the more she changed. She didn't just want Nathaniel. She wanted everything that came with him, the mansion, the influence, the glittering invitations. She was drunk on the promise of status. My mother, too, fed her delusion, praising her every move, every dress fitting, every dinner rehearsal. I was reduced to silence, my contributions erased. I wasn't family anymore. I was a ghost. But ghosts see everything. And I saw the way Nathaniel's eyes softened when they lingered on me a little too long. the flicker of recognition he tried to hide. It unsettled me, though I buried it deep. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was projecting my loneliness. But some part of me sensed a truth Ivy didn't, and that truth would one day unravel her perfect facade. The night before the wedding, Ivy cornered me in the kitchen of my mother's house. Her dress fittings and rehearsals had exhausted everyone else, but not her. She thrived in chaos. She leaned against the counter, sipping champagne, her smile sharp. "Clara," she said sweetly, almost mockingly, "I hope you'll be on your best behavior tomorrow. I've prepared something special for you during my speech." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I searched her face, but she gave nothing away except the glint of cruelty in her eyes. She brushed past me, her perfume cloying, and left me standing there with unease curling in my stomach. I had no idea what she meant. I had no idea that she was sharpening the knife she would plunge into me in front of everyone I had ever known. I didn't know that the very hand I used to lift her up all these years was the same hand that had been nurturing a viper. And tomorrow, that viper would strike. Ivy had prepared her gift for me at the wedding, but what she didn't know was that it would be the beginning of her own undoing. The wedding invitation arrived in a thick ivory envelope, sealed with golden wax, embossed with the initials of Ivy and Nathaniel. For a moment, holding it in my hands, I almost felt something like pride, as if perhaps this family I had sacrificed my life for was finally offering me a place. But when I opened it, my breath caught. My name was there, written neatly in calligraphy, but Ethan's was not. My son, my 7-year-old boy who had been by my side through every storm, had been erased. I called my mother immediately, thinking it must have been a mistake. Her response was cold, clipped. "Clara, it's a high society event, no children allowed. Surely you don't expect Ivy to make her wedding look casual." I swallowed hard, but the anger still surged. "He's not just some child, Mother. He's my son." She sighed, exasperated. "Exactly. He's your son. This is Ivy's night, not yours. Be reasonable, Clara. Don't embarrass us by making demands." Her words stung worse than a slap. Not only was Ethan dismissed, but so was I. It wasn't about space or formality. It was about shame. My mother didn't want Ethan there because he was a visible reminder of my failures, a living symbol of everything they wanted to forget. That night, Ethan climbed into my lap as I sat on the couch, the invitation limp in my hands. "Am I going, Mommy?" he asked, his voice small, hopeful. I couldn't lie. I pulled him close, burying my face in his hair. "No, sweetheart," I whispered, trying to steady my voice. "It's just for adults." He nodded, too mature for his years, and pressed his cheek against my chest. "That's okay. We can have our own party, right? Just you and me." I held him tighter, tears sliding down silently. He deserved better. He deserved the world, and all I could give him was my arms, my love, and a promise that I would never let anyone take him from me. But I couldn't shake the ache. They had cut my son out of his own family. And still, I told myself I would go. I would endure it as I always had. I told myself it was better to appear supportive than bitter. I didn't know then that this choice would become the turning point of my life. The day of the wedding arrived, a display of extravagance that felt like stepping into another world. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, white roses perfumed the air, and every guest seemed dressed as if for a magazine cover. I wore my simplest black dress, the only one I owned that felt remotely elegant. I tried to blend in, tried to disappear. The ceremony itself was flawless. Ivy looked radiant in lace, her smile wide and triumphant as she glided down the aisle. Nathaniel stood tall beside her, unreadable, his jaw set. My chest tightened as I watched them exchange vows, but I forced the feeling down. This was her moment. It wasn't until the reception during the speeches that the trap was sprung. Ivy took the microphone, her veil removed, her golden curls cascading like a crown. She looked around the glittering hall with a smile that was too sharp, too rehearsed. "And, of course," she began sweetly, I have to thank my sister, Clara. She turned to me, her eyes glittering like shards of glass. Because without her, I wouldn't be here today. You see, my sister is a single mother, unwanted by anyone. She taught me what not to become. The room erupted with laughter, loud and cruel. Glasses clinked, whispers buzzed, and I felt every eye on me. My skin burned, my hands trembled. Then my mother, seated nearby, leaned into her microphone and added with a smirk, "She's nothing but a used product." The laughter swelled, crueler this time, sharper. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred as tears pressed against my lashes, but I refused to let them fall. In that instant, Ethan's face flashed in my mind, his small smile the night before, his whispered acceptance of being left behind. My son, my boy. And here I was, being torn apart in front of strangers while he sat at home, oblivious. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the ground to open and swallow me whole. But instead, I stood frozen, my humiliation painted across the faces of hundreds of guests. Then, just as the laughter reached its cruel crescendo, a deep, commanding voice cut through the air like a blade. Enough. The room fell silent, the echo of that single word hanging heavy, suffocating. Enough. The word thundered through the air, silencing the last echoes of laughter. Every head turned toward the speaker, and I froze when I realized it was Nathaniel, the groom himself. He rose from his seat, his face set like stone, and in one swift motion he pulled the microphone from Ivy's hand. The sparkle in her eyes faltered as he stared at her, unblinking, his jaw tight. The room seemed to shrink, the clatter of forks against plates stilled. Guests leaned forward, sensing the shift, the sudden tremor of something unraveling. Ivy gave a nervous laugh, reaching for his arm. "Darling, it was just a joke." "It wasn't a joke," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice sharp as glass. "And it wasn't funny." His gaze swept the hall, landing on me, and for the first time in years, I saw something there that I had never expected. Recognition. He lifted the microphone closer, his voice steady, resonant. "Many of you don't know this, but years ago, when I had nothing, when I was living out of my car, working odd jobs and starving, someone reached out a hand to me, someone who asked for nothing in return, who gave me food, offered me kindness, and reminded me that I was worth saving. That person," he paused, his eyes locking on mine, "was Clara Bennett." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. The same mouths that had just laughed now hung open in stunned silence. Whispers followed, quick and frantic, as eyes darted between me and the man standing at the center of the glittering ballroom. Ivy's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" she hissed under her breath, but the microphone caught her words, amplifying her disbelief. Nathaniel turned to her, his tone cold. "I'm talking about your sister. The woman you mocked. Without her, I would not be standing here. Without her, I would never have become the man you wanted to marry." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their laughter now curdled into shame. Some murmured soft apologies in my direction, as though their whispers could erase the sting of moments ago. Others sat rigid, waiting for the storm to break. Nathaniel's next words landed heavier still. "Clara is not a failure. She is not unwanted. She is the reason I found the strength to climb out of the hole I was in. She is, quite simply, the reason I'm alive today." The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to disappear beneath the weight of his confession, but I couldn't move. My heart hammered in my chest, torn between humiliation and a strange, reluctant pride. Ivy grabbed his arm, desperation flashing across her face. "Why are you saying this now? Why bring her into this?" He looked down at her with eyes that held no warmth. "Because you tried to destroy her in front of everyone, and I won't let you." The guests erupted, not in laughter this time, but in applause. It was tentative at first, then stronger. as if the entire room had been waiting for permission to switch sides. Suddenly, the same faces that moments earlier had smirked at my humiliation were now nodding in approval, whispering praise about my strength, my sacrifice, my worth. Compliments rained down like confetti, but they felt hollow. Where were these voices when I needed them most? Where were they when I was drowning in bills, raising Ethan alone? Still, I felt the tide shifting, the air bending in my favor, and for the first time in years, the balance of power was no longer against me. Ivy stood stiffly, her nails digging into Nathaniel's sleeve. Her smile trembled as she tried to salvage the moment, but her eyes betrayed her panic. The seed of doubt had been planted. What if Nathaniel cared more for me than he ever did for her? The thought flickered in her mind, visible to anyone watching closely. I looked at her then, truly looked, and saw not the radiant bride, but a child trapped in her own greed, terrified of losing the glittering life she had fought to grasp. My mother's face mirrored her horror, her lips pressed thin as she glanced nervously around the room, realizing how quickly the tide had turned. The applause eventually subsided, leaving behind a strange, charged silence. Nathaniel set the microphone down with finality, the sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. His eyes met mine once more, softer this time, filled with something that unsettled me. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper lingered beneath it, something Ivy surely noticed. Ivy forced a laugh, brittle and false, raising her glass in a trembling toast. "To family," she said, her voice cracking. A few guests echoed her half-heartedly, but the damage was done. The sheen of perfection she had polished for so long was gone, replaced by cracks visible to everyone. I sat still, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart refusing to slow. I had not asked for this. I had not planned for Nathaniel to become my defender, but the look in Ivy's eyes told me she was already spinning, already plotting, already terrified of the shadow I cast without even trying. And as I met her gaze across the ballroom, I understood one thing with bone-deep certainty. This was not the end. This was only the beginning, because the masks had just begun to fall. But that was only the opening act. The main performance, the real reckoning, had yet to begin. The ballroom still hummed with uneasy silence after Nathaniel's declaration, but in my mind, the words he spoke sent me spiraling backward into a time I had almost buried. Years ago, before Ethan, before Ivy became the family jewel, I had crossed paths with a young man who looked nothing like the polished groom standing before me now. Nathaniel Pierce had been nobody then. He was a boy with worn shoes and hollow cheeks, living in his car behind the diner where I picked up night shifts. I remember him sitting outside, shivering in the cold, clutching a backpack like it was the only thing tethering him to the world. People passed him by without so much as a glance, but I stopped. I couldn't help myself. "Are you hungry?" I had asked, holding out a takeout container of leftovers. He looked at me, startled, suspicious at first, but then nodded. I sat with him on the curb, watching him eat like he hadn't had a meal in days. That night turned into many nights. I gave him extra meals, helped him find shifts at the diner, encouraged him to keep applying for jobs even when rejection letters piled up. He used to thank me every time, but I always waved it off. Back then, we laughed together. There was an ease between us, a spark I never admitted out loud. He looked at me like I mattered, like I wasn't just the invisible sister holding up the family. For a while, I let myself dream. But then Ivy demanded more. More tuition, more clothes, more sacrifices. I told myself I couldn't afford to think about love, not when my sister's future depended on me. And so, when Nathaniel finally got his first break, an internship that would change his life, I quietly stepped aside. I never told him why. I only knew that I couldn't be selfish, not when Ivy still needed me. I told myself it was the right choice, that love was a luxury people like me couldn't afford. But Ivy didn't see it that way. She saw Nathaniel's rising success, his potential, and she swooped in. She was beautiful, bold, everything I wasn't, and she claimed him before I even realized what was happening. Nathaniel tried to reach out to me a few times in those early years, but I cut the ties. I couldn't risk Ivy finding out that I had once been the girl he leaned on. Now, standing in the glow of chandeliers, with Nathaniel calling me his savior in front of hundreds, the old ache returned like a ghost pressing against my chest. He hadn't forgotten, and Ivy had no idea the foundation of her perfect life rested on the sister she had just humiliated. Ivy, of course, scrambled to regain control. She clutched the microphone again, her laugh too high, too forced. "He's exaggerating," she told the guests, her smile brittle. "We all have stories from our youth. It was just a joke, nothing more." But no one laughed with her. No one nodded in agreement. The faces in the crowd told a different story. Whispers of cruel and ungrateful drifted like smoke. Even Nathaniel's parents, regal and composed, looked visibly unsettled, their eyes narrowing at the daughter-in-law they had welcomed so proudly. "Ivy," Nathaniel's mother said from her seat, her tone like steel wrapped in silk. "Mocking family in such a public way is hardly a joke." Ivy's face flushed crimson, her hands trembling as she set the microphone back on the table. She shot me a glance so venomous I could feel it from across the room. She wanted me gone, erased, but the damage was done. For my part, I said nothing. I kept my eyes lowered, my face calm though my heart raced. I wasn't smiling, I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't the warrior they might have expected me to become in that moment. I was just tired. Tired of carrying, tired of enduring, tired of being the family's scapegoat. Yet beneath that exhaustion was a spark of something else, something unfamiliar but powerful. The tide was turning, and for once, I wasn't fighting against it. Nathaniel tried to approach me later in the evening, weaving through clusters of guests to reach my table. I shook my head gently before he could speak. I didn't want to open the floodgates. Not here, not now. My eyes met his for a fleeting second, and I let him see the truth. Gratitude, sorrow, and a wall he could not climb. His expression softened, but he respected the distance. Ivy, meanwhile, began to unravel. Her attempts to laugh it off failed, her smile slipped too often, her hands fidgeted with her dress. She whispered furiously to my mother, who sat stony-faced, too aware of the piercing gazes from Nathaniel's family. My mother had always defended her, but even she looked shaken by the spectacle. Whispers circulated the hall. How the golden bride had revealed her true nature in the very moment meant to crown her. How the sister she scorned stood taller in silence than she ever could in satin and diamonds. By the end of the night, Ivy's victory had soured into suspicion. She had won the ring, the ceremony, the applause, but beneath it all, cracks had begun to form in the glass castle she thought was unbreakable, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this was only the beginning. Because there was one truth no one else had heard yet, one secret buried deeper than gratitude, deeper than sacrifice, deeper than Ivy's fear. And when it came to light, nothing would ever be the same. The morning after the wedding should have been Ivy's triumph. Instead, the Pierce family sat in a private room of their estate, voices low and faces grim. I wasn't there, but whispers traveled quickly. The humiliation from the night before had spread like wildfire. Guests who had witnessed the spectacle wasted no time in retelling the story. The golden bride who mocked her sister had become a cautionary tale in high society. Nathaniel's parents, proud of their name and reputation, could not ignore it. Ivy's cruelty had stained their family, and now, for the first time, they were openly questioning whether the marriage should go forward. Contracts had been signed, arrangements made, but prestige was currency, and Ivy had squandered it. Her phone calls went unanswered by old friends. Messages she sent were left on read. Even some of the Pierce family's long-standing partners began to distance themselves, subtly but unmistakably. The whispers in the city were unkind. If she can treat her own sister that way, what does it say about her character? Ivy tried to fight back, flooding her social media with carefully staged photos, smiling with Nathaniel, captioning them with saccharine words. But the damage was already done. The comments told a different story, one she couldn't control. Nathaniel, meanwhile, grew quieter, more distant. At dinners, he spoke little. At gatherings, his gaze wandered to me even when I wasn't in the room. And one evening, when his parents pressed him for the truth, he said what Ivy had feared all along. "She saved me," he confessed, his voice steady, not just with food or kindness. "Clara believed in me when no one else did. I wouldn't be who I am without her." His parents nodded, approving his honesty, but he didn't stop there. His next words were the ones that set Ivy's world ablaze. "And once I loved her. Perhaps in some way, I always will." The room reportedly fell silent. His parents exchanged glances, understanding but grave. Ivy, hearing those words later, nearly collapsed. She had always feared that Clara was a shadow she couldn't compete with. Now, Nathaniel had spoken the truth aloud, and there was no taking it back. For me, the confession reached my ears through a mutual friend who had been close enough to overhear. The words twisted inside me, painful, tender, bittersweet. I had long buried any fantasy of what might have been, but knowing he had once loved me was both a balm and a fresh wound. It didn't matter. The past was the past. I had Ethan, and that was all that mattered now. Ivy, however, unraveled. She accused Nathaniel of betrayal, accused me of scheming, accused everyone but herself. Her tantrums became public, her voice shrill, her anger impossible to contain. Friends who once admired her beauty now whispered about her desperation. Nathaniel stopped defending her. In time, he stopped answering her calls at all. And my mother, oh, my mother. For the first time in my life, she came to me not with criticism, not with scorn, but with tears. She stood at my apartment door, aged and trembling, her eyes wet. "Clara," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I was wrong. I should never have let them treat you that way. Please, forgive me. Please, help me fix this." But I couldn't. Not because I hated her, though God knows I had reasons to, but because forgiveness cannot be begged in desperation. Forgiveness must be earned, slowly, patiently, and she had spent too many years pouring her love into Ivy while letting me starve for scraps. I shook my head, gently but firmly. "It's too late, Mother." Her tears fell harder. She reached for me, but I stepped back. I wasn't cruel, I wasn't triumphant, I was simply done. Ivy's world collapsed in slow motion. Nathaniel pulled away. The Pierce family spoke openly of an annulment. Her mother's support wavered, no longer strong enough to shield her. The girl who had once stood at the center of every room now found herself standing alone. And me? I went home. I wrapped my arms around Ethan, holding him close as he laughed about something silly he'd seen on television. His little arms circled my neck, his head rested against my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Outside, the storm raged, reputations crumbling, alliances breaking, whispers multiplying. But in my small apartment, warmth filled the air. The only eyes that mattered looked up at me with unconditional love. The world might never see me as the golden child, the flawless bride, the darling of high society. But I had something they could never take, a love pure and untainted, the kind of love that came from sacrifice, from loyalty, from truth. And as I held Ethan, listening to the sound of his laughter echo through the room, I realized something simple and undeniable. I had already won, but somewhere deep down, I also knew. The story wasn't finished yet. The weeks after the wedding brought a calm I hadn't known in years. For the first time, I woke without the weight of their voices pressing on me, my mother's sharp criticisms, Ivy's sneers, the endless reminders of my place at the bottom. The silence was strange at first, almost unsettling, but soon it became my sanctuary. I began to live differently. I stopped answering Ivy's frantic calls, the ones that alternated between tearful apologies and venomous accusations. I no longer bent beneath my mother's guilt, no longer let her weep at my door, demanding I patch together the family she had chosen to tear apart. For once in my life, I drew a line, and on my side of it, there was peace. Ethan noticed the change before I did. "You smile more, Mommy," he told me one evening, curled up against my side as we watched a movie. His small observation pierced deeper than he knew. He was right. I did smile more, and it wasn't forced anymore. It came easily, born of freedom I'd never tasted. I returned to school at night, finishing the degree I'd abandoned years earlier. I let myself dream again, not about what others needed from me, but about what I wanted. It wasn't about wealth or prestige. It was about standing tall in my own skin, about giving Ethan a mother who wasn't crushed under the weight of regret. Nathaniel reached out once, quietly, through a letter slipped into my mailbox. He thanked me again, told me he still owed me more than he could repay, confessed that a part of his heart had never stopped remembering. I folded the letter and tucked it away, not because I wanted to hold on to him, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to matter. I didn't write back. Some doors, once closed, must remain so. Meanwhile, Ivy's life unraveled publicly. The Pierce family withdrew from her slowly, at first with polite distance, then with open disdain. Events she once dominated no longer welcomed her. Nathaniel stopped appearing by her side, and when he did, his eyes carried none of the warmth she craved. The press caught whispers of annulment, of scandals hidden beneath lace and diamonds. The same people who once fawned over Ivy now crossed the street to avoid her. At home, my mother aged overnight. Her once commanding voice became frail, her steps slower. She called often, begging me to visit, to forgive. But I couldn't give her what she wanted. She had chosen Ivy again and again, had carved me out of her heart so many times that nothing remained for me to return to. I let her words wash over me like rain against glass, heard but never absorbed. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't gloat, didn't revel in their pain. That wasn't who I was, and it wasn't who I wanted Ethan to see. My revenge was simpler, quieter. It was in my refusal to break, my refusal to let their cruelty define me. The life I built, brick by fragile brick, was the truest justice of all. Sometimes, though, I thought of Ivy, alone in her gilded cage, trapped in a world she no longer controlled. I imagined her lying awake at night, replaying the moment Nathaniel's voice cut across her laughter, the moment the room turned against her. That was her sentence. To live every day, knowing she had been unmasked, that her cruelty had cost her everything she thought she deserved. My silence became the loudest answer I could give. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I only needed to live, to keep walking forward, leaving their shadows behind. One night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he asked me a question that stilled me. "Mommy, are we happy now?" His wide eyes searched mine, innocent and full of trust. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing his hair back. "We're happy now." And for the first time I meant it. The past would never change. My scars would never fade completely. But I had risen from them, reshaped them into something stronger, something unshakable. My life was no longer theirs to control. I had been mocked, humiliated, cast aside. But I had survived, and now I was free. Sometimes justice doesn't come with fire or fury. Sometimes it comes in the stillness after the storm, in the quiet strength of refusing to bow. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply to live well, because in the end, silence can scream louder than anything else.